with us forever and ever and ever.
I'm 17. I like to collect dolls, specifically with vintage looks or dates on them. Some I bought at a peddler's in Kentucky or a vintage closing sale in Michigan. One I actually bought on Etsy, the previous owner listing the item as haunted with a backstory. I have named all the dolls, and I am pretty attached. I have 5 dolls, all of which I have felt a connection to when purchasing. The Etsy doll was the second doll I bought. I did not notice any activity after buying this specific doll. My boyfriend came over today. We've been dating about 3 months. He is spiritually aware. He must have gotten off the bed and snapped the porcelain foot of one of the dolls. This is not the Etsy doll. The foot was already broken, and I did glue it back together a few months ago. He noticed the foot when putting his shoes on. He was apologizing, and I told him it was okay, and he ended up going to splash his face with some water. Before going, he did leave the doll slouched with the foot laying next to her. I was playing on my phone, and he comes back and sits on the floor. He starts telling me the doll was no longer slouched, and she was staring right at him. My boyfriend is thoroughly convinced this doll has moved, and she is upset. He left shortly after, and did text me a warning that the doll may be attached to me personally, and that I should sage my room in case. I personally have only had one experience, which happened with another one of my dolls when I was spending the summer with my grandma. But I had not slept in 2 days and can't truly say that anything actually happened. Any advice?
So when I was 7 through 9, I don't remember what age I was, I had this doll that was about as tall as a German Shepherd dog. This doll had a voice box where if you pressed it, the doll would laugh and giggle for about 30 seconds. This voice box was placed in a pocket in the back of the doll's dress. Eventually, I kinda got annoyed of the voice box due to it going off a lot. Before this incident, I had thought that some stuff behind it was pressing it or that the pocket was sewn on too tightly, so it was pressing the box when there was pressure on the pocket. So, as I said, I got annoyed of the box. So I had emptied out a drawer and placed the box in the drawer. I had closed the drawer carefully so as not to move the box in the slightest. After this, I went to sleep. At maybe midnight, I had woken up to the sound of the box coming from the doll I had made sure to place on the opposite side of the room from the drawer the box was in. Forgetting for a minute that I had taken the box out of the doll, I tried to go back to sleep. About 5 minutes later, I remembered where I put the box and got up to open the drawer. It was still there, exactly where I had left it. A few weeks later, I got rid of the doll. However, for a few years after that, I could still hear the laughter of the doll's voice box. I only remembered this incident when I had found one of my porcelain dolls on the kitchen counter. My mom had moved it for some reason.
We had a little doll that had a spirit attached to it. We even had a paranormal team come to take it to a museum with other haunted artifacts local to us. We found it with another doll at a yard sale. They were both missing the same side leg. We joked with the owners about them being haunted, and we bought them both for $5. When we got in the car to leave the yard sale we found the dolls at, it started to hail with the sun still shining. We ended up going to eat because there was no way we could continue shopping at yard sales in the rain. After we got done eating about an hour later, we went to another yard sale a block away from where we got the dolls from. Everything was dry and nothing was out of place. I asked the lady, how did she keep her stuff dry when that hail had come through, and she didn't know what I was talking about. If my fiancé wasn't there with me, I don't know if I would have believed myself. That night, my fiancé had a real bad dream about the smaller doll, and it was telling him to kill me. He woke up and thought he actually hurt me. I joined some groups and shared the picture of the dolls on Facebook. They immediately knew it was a little doll. My friend showed her mum the picture of the doll. Her mum wanted to come see it before the paranormal team took it. When they got to my apartment, she went to hold the doll but immediately sat back down because the energy was so overwhelming. I asked her if I should try to hold it because it was my doll. She said sure. I picked it up, and as soon as I did, I felt this sensation like a high almost start to come in through my feet and slowly inch its way up my body. When it got to my neck, I started choking and sobbing uncontrollably. Everyone yelled at me to put it down. I put it down, and the feeling went much faster back down out through my feet, the same way it came in. My aunt almost died when she was in a car wreck and could feel her soul leaving through her feet. Whatever it was tried entering my body for sure. We all wanted to go outside to get some fresh air after that. We walked outside between the apartment buildings, and on the deck behind me all of a sudden, there were like 5 big crows behind me on the balcony screeching at me, like they wanted to attack us. Well, my friend and her mum went home. I don't blame them. Anyways, the paranormal team comes. The air is so heavy when you walk into my apartment, you can literally feel the energy. They start blessing the dolls and the house, and the neighbor's dog is howling the whole time, which it never does. The lady carried a white stone to keep her grounded and protected, and she started freaking out because the stone turned hot. It was all so crazy. I'm so glad I have so many witnesses. In pictures, if you look at the one doll, if you zoom into its right eye, you can see the outline of a little boy's face. I didn't even notice that until this past year when somebody pointed it out to me. Several people told me it was the spirit of a little boy. I've been interested in the paranormal for as long as I can remember, and have been investigating the paranormal for about 12 years now. I purchased 3 haunted dolls a year ago, and up until now, all has been quiet, except for one incident that happened a few months ago. A few months ago, I was laying in bed desperate to use the bathroom, but not wanting to brave the cold. Being the only person in the house, I hear someone psst behind me. It takes me a minute to brave turning over, but when I did, there was nothing and nobody there. I have no explanation for this sound. None of my electronics make this noise, nor does anything else in my house. My cats do not have access to my bedroom or the hallway leading to the bedroom while I sleep. We can't hear their noises from the bedroom. Then nothing more until last week. My partner has a cylindrical massage roller. It sits underneath the exercise bike. So we're sitting watching TV, and the roller rolls across the room out of nowhere. Nothing interacted with it. I accept that there is a possibility that it could have fallen, but with how it usually sits, it seems unlikely. It also has never happened before, and hasn't happened since. My cats have one of those little balls that light up when something touches it. The last 2 days, it's been lighting up randomly on its own. I hear this can happen when the batteries are low, but this was a fresh ball about a week ago. And today, sitting quietly scrolling social media, the guitar that sits on the stand across the lounge from the sofa randomly rings out. All cats were sleeping at the time. Nothing was around it to fall and hit the strings. Again, I just don't have an explanation for it. I plan to do some EVP work with the dolls and see whether anything comes of it. But my house also sits on the site of an old hospital and has a church and cemetery just across the street too. So who knows what might be going on. This is super exciting for me, but I'm trying to keep my skeptical brain on and trying to debunk everything. I'll keep you all updated with any new happenings. Update. Things have been quiet for a few days now. It feels kind of eerie with nothing happening. Almost like the feeling you get of calm before a storm. I'll add further updates if and when anything else happens. Update 2. Scratching continues. It's happening in the daytime now too. I have searched high and low for the source and have come up empty. Balls continue to flash on their own, but nothing new yet. I hope to get some quiet time in the next few weeks to try some EVP. Update 3. I was woken up to scratching again yesterday night, followed by a woman quietly singing. This is completely new activity. Every other time I've heard something that sounded like a voice, it was always male. Update 4. Laying in bed last night, trying to get some sleep but struggling, I heard a male voice grunt behind me, as if someone was turning over in their sleep in the bed next to me. It took me a moment to realize that my partner was not yet in bed, so this noise couldn't be coming from him. I've never been scared of any of the paranormal activity I've experienced before, not even when I've been physically touched. But for some reason, this felt different. Wrong somehow, and I jumped out of bed and literally ran to the lounge shaking. My partner searched the bedroom in case someone had broken in and we hadn't realized. There was nobody to be found. This one left me shaken, and I can't yet put my finger on why.
This is something I experienced shortly before moving out of one of my teenage homes a couple of years ago. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, my great-grandmother used to collect dolls. One of the dolls I took a particular liking to because of how goddamn creepy it looks. She picked up on it and actually gave it to me not too long before she passed away. Fast forward to the story at hand. My 2 stepbrothers and I were sitting in the living room chatting late at night, around 1 a.m. or so. For context, this is a cookie cutter house, so when you walk in, you basically have to choose between going upstairs or downstairs. The living room is directly upstairs from the front door. There is a fireplace on the left-hand wall, but not much else to note since it was an open concept. Adjacent to the wall, there was the railing overlooking the doorway area, and in front of the railing is the couch. There is also a television sitting on the ground on the wall opposite to the couch. During our conversation, we got on the topic of childhood paranormal experiences. Joking around, I went and grabbed the doll from my bedroom and leaned it up on the shelf above the fireplace. I made sure when I put the doll up there that it was leaning securely so as not to slip off. Some things that are now important. The television is on, but just in the no signal screen, and because we were preparing to move, there are boxes and trash bags piled in front of the fireplace, at least 3 to 5 feet out. We were all sitting on the couch at the time this happens. In the middle of a story, my younger stepbrother was telling about an experience he had in the basement of a childhood home. The doll was flung forward from the shelf, landing a good feet away from the boxes, meaning it flew a good 6 to 8 feet away from the fireplace. At that exact same time the doll made contact with the ground, the television shut itself off and turned itself back on. We have never had any electrical issues in that house, or with that TV. Needless to say, we about pissed ourselves. I know people are going to say it's possible that the doll had just fallen, but the doll flew forward off of the shelf, even though it was leaning backwards. And things that fall don't typically fall outward several feet. Let me know what you think. If this post gets traction, I'll post a picture of the doll.
So, I used to work at a haunted Halloween store. Anyone who worked there often had some creepy story from encountering the ghosts. We had a homeless man with a collection of dolls who lived out behind our store. He probably wasn't the first homeless guy to live there. It was a good spot. I bought an animatronic Pennywise clown from that store at a fantastic discount. I was so excited when I brought him home. He and my animatronic collection bring the neighborhood and me and my family so much joy around Halloween. My house was not haunted, but after we brought him home, weird things started happening. For example, I woke up one night to a clown standing at the foot of my bed. It wasn't just a nightmare thing either. It stayed there after I blinked and jumped up screaming. But when we put Pennywise away down in the basement, the activity stopped. We've had him since 2019. Every time I bring him upstairs, the stuff starts happening. Lights flicker. 2 years ago, the light in my bathroom started going off like a strobe light. My toddler saw it too and asked if we could shut the door because it was scaring him. It went on and on for like half an hour. One time, Pennywise's eyes glowed and he was not plugged in. My husband saw this one too, if I remember right. The last season, when we brought him upstairs, he moved, turning his whole body towards me while I was sitting in my chair. He wasn't plugged in. Even after he was plugged in, he didn't move like that. It would have required deliberate effort to move him like that. Also, a bulb upstairs started flickering like a strobe light and wouldn't stop until I acknowledged it and filmed it. It had a clear rhythm to it and went on for several minutes. I got the distinct impression he wanted to go back into the basement. I did an EVP and video session when I was alone with my toddler asleep, and I caught distinct rhythmic bangs on the wall next to me. Not anywhere near the room my toddler was in. I also caught a possible light anomaly. About the lights, none of these lights ever died or even flickered again after these instances. We put Pennywise back into the basement after Halloween. My husband set him up so he's looking out of the window. A few odd things happened, helpful things. I was looking for something all over. I'd looked in my bedroom multiple times. I go back in there, and there the thing was, right in front of my nightstand, nicely folded and where I put my feet when I get up in the morning. It hadn't been there before. Music started playing on my phone when I needed to be somewhere and hadn't set my alarm. You would have had to deliberately push a button to get this music to play. Then it just stopped. It was almost like he was saying, "Thanks for putting me back in the basement," and with a view. However, when I'm going through a hard time, I will smell cigarette smoke and alcohol. No one in my house smokes or drinks, yet sometimes the smell is so strong I can taste it. I've also smelled perfume, and no one wears perfume in my house. I have a sensory sensitivity to smell. Most perfumes make me sick. That's when I really wish I had a spirit box. I have questions, but I really don't want to invite anything else into my home. I'm fine with this Pennywise ghost. Whoever they are, they're not mean. But I don't want anything negative in my home. It's our sanctuary. I really don't know what to do. I guess it doesn't matter. I don't have to talk to it. But I'm just really curious. I've had dolls my entire life. Baby dolls, porcelain dolls, Barbie dolls. I think you get it at this point. I like them just fine. My dad fears them, and as kids my sister and I would joke about it with him, since my great-grandmother's house is filled with all kinds of dolls and porcelain statues. But in recent years, especially right now, something feels off. I'm going to dive straight into it. My sister recently moved in with us due to her being unhappy living with my biological mother. She is in high school and naturally grew out of wanting her American Girl doll. I would say I'm the proud owner of two, except here's the thing. The home my sister was in was charged with so much negative and tense energy. I know she did not mean to bring any negative spirits into our home, and I do not blame her for this. I love my sister very much, and it was kind of her to give me her Josephina doll with the little things and clothing that came with her. It is a beautiful, well taken care of doll, but I can feel something is very wrong with it. Even as I'm sitting here typing this out, I feel like something is watching me, something very bad and unwelcome in my parents' home. I'm fearing the worst, but I'm not crying for help, nor do I need it. because I feel like I should try to assess this situation myself before I decide to involve others with this dark energy that seems to radiate off this doll. Right now, she's very strong. I'm afraid to go near the shelf she is sitting on at the moment. When I first got her, I changed her outfit and felt this very sad energy. Even the doll looked sad, as if it witnessed something truly heartbreaking and awful. Now it feels evil and insidious. I never have gotten this feeling from any doll I've received as a gift in my entire life. I'm an adult and really shouldn't be acting like a scared child, but this is terrifying. I feel uneasy and an overwhelming sense of dread, but I do not feel like I need to relocate at the moment, since I feel like I am strong enough to fight whatever this thing may be. I need to protect my family, and I will do it. I've no option but to do this myself. I hate running from things like this and refuse to do it at this time. At the same time, I do not know nor possess the ability to cleanse this doll. I don't trust online sources for these types of situations. Many things will mislead you. I don't like the idea of putting the doll away because I don't want my sister to feel sad. But at the same time, I don't want to tell her the reason so she doesn't think I'm crazy. My stepmom is spiritual, but she would just think that I'm overreacting and acting like a scared child. My dad would probably agree with me, but that is just because he is afraid of dolls in general. He's not really into the spiritual side of it, nor gives it much thought like I do. It is probably for the best too. I don't know. Maybe my stepmom would believe me, but say that I'm overreacting for fear of manifesting in the fear even more. She is wise like that, but she's also turning a blind eye, and that solves nothing. I think I know who gave it this bad energy too. I will not refer to them because they are bad and they give off the worst evil energy. I respect people, but this person in my life, as well as my sisters, is truly an evil being. I cannot forgive this person either. This doll has a story, and not a happy one to tell me either. This is just the beginning of things too. I keep seeing shadows of a man out of the corners of my eyes, regardless of the time of day or night. I went downstairs to get some water when I saw it very clearly this time. The resemblance it took to the person was exact. Same shadow and same figure, shape and height. I almost dropped my cup. I am contemplating on telling a close friend of mine, but also refuse to burden them with something as silly sounding as this. I hope these occurrences stop and I can put it out of my mind. I'm wearing a rose quartz bracelet that has other stones that I unfortunately do not remember the names of, but it does protect me to an extent. It may sound silly to all of you, but this bracelet was made by very good people and their energy shines through this bracelet. I hope it helps me fend off whatever this is, and that I can tell it to leave me alone before I have to act upon it and drive it away forcefully myself. I'm not afraid to do anything I need to protect my parents and my sister, even if it means I have to get my stepmother's blowtorch for her creme brulee. Before you say it's just a doll, it's harmless, think again. I said that once too. I was very mistaken, very stupidly mistaken. I hope this never happens to any of you, and do not wish this upon anybody. It is a very painful and draining experience to go through. This is something I experienced shortly before moving out of one of my teenage homes a couple of years ago. When I was around 13 or 14 years old, my great-grandmother used to collect dolls. One of the dolls I took a particular liking to because of how goddamn creepy it looked. She picked up on it and actually gave it to me not too long before she passed away. Fast forward to the story at hand. My two stepbrothers and I were sitting in the living room, chatting late at night, around 1 a.m. or so. For context, this is a cookie cutter house, so when you walk in you basically have to choose between going upstairs or downstairs. The living room is directly upstairs from the front door. There is a fireplace on the left-hand wall, but not much else to note since it was an open concept. Adjacent to the wall, there was the railing overlooking the doorway area. and in front of the railing is the couch. There's also a television sitting on the ground on the wall opposite the couch. During our conversation, we got into the topic of childhood paranormal experiences. Joking around, I went and grabbed the doll from my bedroom and leaned it up on the shelf above the fireplace. I made sure when I put the doll up there that it was leaning securely, so as not to slip off. Some things that are now important. The television is on, but just the no signal screen. And because we were preparing to move, there are boxes and trash bags filled in front of the fireplace, at least 3 to 5 feet out. We were all sitting on the couch at the time this happens. In the middle of the story, my younger stepbrother was telling about an experience he had in the basement of a childhood home. The doll was flung forward from the shelf, landing a good few feet away from the boxes, meaning it flew a good 6 to 8 feet away from the fireplace. At the exact same time the doll made contact with the ground, the television shut itself off and turned itself back on. We have never had any electrical issues in that house or with that TV. Needless to say, we about pissed ourselves. I know people are going to say it's possible that the doll had just fallen, but the doll flew forward off the shelf, even though it was leaning backwards. And things that fall don't typically fall outwards several feet. Let me know what you all think. So when I was 7 to 9, I don't remember what age I was. I had this doll that was about as tall as a German Shepherd. This doll had a voice box where if you pressed it, the doll would laugh and giggle for about 30 seconds. This voice box was placed in a pocket in the back of the doll's dress. Eventually, I got annoyed with the voice box due to it going off a lot. Before this incident, I had thought that some stuff behind it was pressing it, or that the pocket was sewn on too tightly, so it was pressing the box when there was no pressure on the pocket. So as I said, I got annoyed at the box, so I had emptied out a drawer and placed the box in the drawer. I had closed the drawer carefully so as not to move the box in the slightest. After this, I went to sleep. At maybe midnight, I had woken up to the sound of the box coming from the doll. I had made sure to place the doll on the opposite side of the room from the drawer the box was in. Forgetting for a minute that I had taken the box out of the doll, I tried to get back to sleep. About 5 minutes later, I remembered where I put the box and got up to open the drawer. It was still there, exactly where I had left it. A few weeks later, I got rid of the doll. However, for a few years after that, I could still hear the laughter of the doll's voice box. I only remembered this incident when I had found one of my porcelain dolls on the kitchen counter. My mum had moved it for some reason. This happened about 10 years ago when I was in secondary school. That year, I was in the morning session. Since my school was in Queenstown, I stayed in Jurong. I have to leave the house quite early to catch the 7 a.m. bus. Normally, I would get up at 6 a.m. to get ready for school. The night before the incident, my sister and I had difficulty sleeping. We share the same bedroom. It was a very warm night, so since my father was working the night shift, we went to sleep in my mother's air-conditioned room. I still could not sleep, so at 5:30 a.m., I decided to take a bath and get ready for school. I took my bath in my mother's bathroom and then went up to my room to get ready. I was combing my hair when I heard somebody calling me, "Kakao, kakao," sister in Malay. I turned around thinking my sister had woken up, but there was no one around. I went to my mother's room and found my sister still asleep. I grew scared but brushed it off as my imagination. I went to the room again to get my school bag and, again, heard it. This time I heard a small child's voice calling me, "Kakao, kakao." I turned and saw my sister's doll, the one that cries when you took out the pacifier, and its eyes actually blinked at me. I immediately ran to my mum's room and stayed there until 6:45 a.m. Once I reached home from school, I took the doll and threw it in the storeroom, and since then, I had banned all dolls from my room. So, I'm going to share something with you that happened to me as a child. At the time, I was around 10 or 11, and my sister would have been 8 or 9. Long story short, our cousins who we saw every weekend had purchased a life-sized knitted clown from an op shop or thrift store. I know what you are thinking. Why on earth would anyone buy one of those? My thoughts exactly. Anyway, from the moment this clown arrived at their place, weird things started to happen. I'll give you a couple of examples. They would place the clown in their bedroom, for example, and when they woke up, it would be sitting on the couch or in the kitchen, and this went on for some time. One night, a few months after they got the clown, myself and my sister had a sleepover at our cousin's place. By this point, we were all super scared of the clown and didn't want it to be anywhere near us. So for whatever reason, we locked it in the outdoor dog kennels that they had at their place. Sure enough, when we woke up the next morning, she was inside the house, sitting on the couch. Although all our parents were skeptical, our uncle, our cousin's father, decided it would be best to just get rid of the clown for good. He put the clown on the back of his ute, ready to take a load of rubbish to the tip that afternoon. This is the part I really can't explain. Myself, my sister, and our 2 cousins were all out the back of their place riding on the mini 4-wheelers they had, and we stopped to have a break and chat. Then out of literally nowhere, we see the clown running like it's human through the long grass maybe 50 meters away from us. Terrified was an understatement. After 10 seconds, it had disappeared into the long grass. We ran to our parents and tried to explain what we saw, when everyone realized the clown wasn't on the back of our uncle's ute anymore. No one could understand, especially us 4 kids after seeing what we saw. That was the last time we ever saw the clown. We went back to the long grass where we saw it, but nothing was there. We talk about it still to this day, and honestly, still can't believe it. This story sounds like a load of bullshit, I know. But we know what we saw that day, and it's something I'll never get out of my head. I suppose the underlying question is, where did the clown go? And what had caused this to happen? This story happened to me during the lunar 7th month, some 5 years ago. I went over to my then ex's house for dinner at about 6 p.m. After dinner, I was bored enough to actually play with my ex's niece, nephews, and a bunch of other kids who were aged around 5 to 8 years old in one of the bedrooms. I was watching the kids play when suddenly the 5-year-old niece, Crystal, tripped over this English baby doll. One of the ones with blinking eyes, eyelashes, ultra creepy kind. Crystal started crying, and like most Chinese parents who hit whatever hurt their precious little child, I picked up the doll and started spanking its bottom repeatedly. It worked, and her niece started giggling, so I put the doll down on the ground and went to the living room to watch TV. Suddenly, my ex's older sister, Brenda, came out from an adjacent room, asking which kid was the little prankster who tapped her from behind several times. Upon hearing the commotion, I asked her what happened. She explained that she was in the bedroom adjacent to the kids' room where the door was left ajar and the lights were turned off because her fiancé was taking a nap. With nothing to do, she was gazing at the mall opposite from their flat through the window when someone tapped her lower back from behind. The first time she ignored it and brushed it off as one of the kids playing a prank on her. The second time, she turned around and, from the corner of her eye, caught a glimpse of a half-naked kid dashing out from her room. Thinking that the kids were trying to play with her, she looked for them in the other room and was puzzled to find all of them were fully clothed. She was certain of what she saw, but came out of the room puzzled. Who exactly was that little kid who was half naked? Brenda immediately related this incident to her aunt, who then sought the help from a bomo over the phone. This is where the creepy part begins. The bomo told her aunt to enter the children's room and look under the bed. He then insisted that she will find a doll there. Furthermore, he managed to give her one more feature for identification: the color of the doll's eyes, which were blue. I accompanied their aunt to the room and retrieved the doll, and to my astonishment, it was the doll that I spanked earlier. At that time, many questions raced through my head. How did the bomo know that there was a doll under the bed? How did the bomo also know the color of the doll's eyes? Why did the kid not look for me instead, since I was the one who spanked the doll? The bomo immediately instructed their aunt to leave the doll under a tree in the estate's park, and we did. After this incident, we went out for supper and came back to find the doll already taken from the tree. Some more questions popped out. Who in their right frame of mind would dare pick up such dolls during the night of a lunar 7th month? My mum always emphasized never to pick things up during the 7th month because they may be dirty. I kept quiet about the doll spanking incident for fear of getting a scolding from my ex. Of all the questions that went through my head that night, only one was answered by another medium who was a friend of my mum. She claimed that I was sort of untouchable by dirty stuff because I have a pair of really thick eyebrows. Glad I have them. Recently I've been reading some other stories in this sub, and I was reminded of something that happened a while ago. Once a year, my parents go on vacation together somewhere in the US, usually to the Bahamas or to Florida. They leave me in charge of the house with my dog and like for me to check on my nana who lives in our basement. Normal, right? There's another important bit of background information. My dad takes part in this weird golfing competition with his friends where if someone wins a certain amount of holes, they get to take home this creepy doll as a sort of trophy. I don't get why, but I guess it's some running gag. Well, my dad won the competition and he brought it home before he left. I am not at all scared of dolls. In fact, before he left, I slept with it beside me as a joke. It was basically an old baby doll with a missing eye and a brown dress. I don't know the origin of it and didn't really bother to ask. November rolls around and my parents leave for their vacation. Everything goes normal for a little while, but then things start to get weird. Because I'm the stereotypical little brother, I put the doll on my sister's bed, who is in university, and took a picture to send to her as a joke. She hates dolls, so I leave the room with the doll still in there and head into my room just to send the photo and move on with my life. A few minutes later, I hear a massive bang. I jump, startled, and go to look out into the hallway. My sister's room has slammed shut. Now, our hallway has no opening windows, and there wasn't any sort of draft. Even if there was, that bang sounded forceful. A little on edge, I open her door and see the doll has fallen face forward, even though I left it sitting upright. I thought it was weird, but brought the doll back into my room and moved on. That night, I'm sleeping normally in my parents' room. I have to sleep in there while my parents are away because I need to keep an eye on my dog, and she refuses to sleep anywhere else. I wake up suddenly in the night, which is odd. I usually sleep all the way through the night. I check the time and see it's around 3 a.m. This immediately freaks me out because I read that it's the witching hour. I glanced over at my dog and she's awake too with her head up. Also strange. I put on my little puppy voice and ask my dog if she needs to pee, but she just stares back at me, then looks to the closet. I look to the closet too and see that it's open. even though I remember shutting it before going to bed. I quickly turn on the lamp and get out of bed to close the door. I don't even bother looking inside. My teenage brain still thinks a ghost is more likely than an intruder. So I get back into bed, scroll on my phone a bit until I fall asleep. I wake up the next morning as usual to feed my dog, but when I go out into the hall, I see my bedroom door is open. I always close my door when I am not in it. Now, it's still dark out because I have to feed my dog around 6 a.m. or she throws a fit. I look inside my room, turn on the light, and the doll is on the floor. I left it on my bed. I remembered last night and am now feeling paranoid. But again, I just put the doll back on my bed and leave, deciding to just have my door open. After feeding my dog, I went back to bed to sleep a couple of extra hours. That's when the most frightening thing happened. I was woken up by a loud banging sound, loud enough to wake me up, the heaviest sleeper in my family. I quickly got up and ran downstairs, my first thought being maybe my nana had fallen in the basement and was banging for me to help her. But when I got downstairs, I realized the banging was coming from my balcony door. I saw the glass shaking, as if something was hitting it from outside. The banging was so loud, it was shaking the counters. The strangest part is that my dog was just standing in front of the door staring at it. And she's the type of dog who will start barking if a mouse farts. I'm really shaken up at this point. It's completely still outside. No wind at all. I text my parents and tell them what's going on. As soon as I do, the banging stops. They tell me it's probably nothing and not to worry about it. I went downstairs to see my nana, but she had no idea about what happened. She's almost completely deaf, so couldn't hear it. She can't even walk up the stairs, so there was no way of her causing any of this. That was the last weird incident that occurred. The next week, my parents got back. I didn't tell them everything that happened because I didn't want them to think I'm a chicken or something. Needless to say, I moved that doll out of my room until my dad brought it back to his golf team. Nothing strange happened after that. I still have no idea what went on during those couple of days, but it certainly was strange. I sort of wonder the story behind the doll now.
This story is about a haunted doll. This particular doll was about the size and weight of a young toddler, and its name was William. My grandmother bought William at a flea market in the mid-1970s. He was dirty, naked, and torn, but she saw something about him that she liked, so she bought him anyway. She brought the doll home, cleaned it up, bought toddler-sized clothes for it to wear, named it, and sat it in the rocker in her parlor. Once or twice a year, grandmother would buy William a new outfit to wear and give him another good cleaning. Then back to the rocker he would go. William sat there for years. William always scared me when I was a kid. Not only did I have a mannequin phobia to deal with, but William himself was strange looking. He was a very lifelike doll, but on his face he wore an expression that struck me as much too aware and knowing to belong to a child of the age William was supposed to be. Rather than as a toy child, I regarded William as an adult in miniature, and not a particularly nice adult at that. To me, when I was 10, William looked like he knew where I slept, and wanted me to know that he knew. If garlic had been a deterrent for dolls instead of vampires, my room would have smelled like pizza. But William never visited me while I was growing up, and he never gave any indication that he was anything other than a big doll with a strange expression. Until my grandmother passed away, and William went to live with my Aunt Lorraine and Uncle Nelson. Lorraine's kids, Michelle and David, were 11 and 9 respectively, just about the age I had been when I first encountered William, and their reaction to him was remarkably similar. He made them nervous. Their mother had propped up William on a wingback chair in the living room,
and both kids told me that it was eerie to get up at night to use the bathroom and find William dimly illuminated by the hall light, seeming to watch their comings and goings. From his seat, they said, William could clearly see the doors to both of their rooms, doors they began keeping closed at night, so William couldn't watch them sleeping. Even with the door closed, Michelle remembered recently, it was like I could feel him staring at me, waiting for me to come out. Eventually, William stopped waiting. One night, David got up to a sleeping house for a trip to the bathroom and was surprised to find that William wasn't in his usual spot. David was the younger of the two children, but also the more level-headed one. He decided that his mother must have moved the doll after he had gone to bed, maybe to clean it up or dress it in a new set of clothes, as grandmother had done. He finished in the bathroom and returned to bed, neglecting to shut his door. And as he tucked himself back in, his sleepy eyes widened in alarm. There, back in his usual spot, was William. David leapt from his bed and quickly closed and locked his bedroom door. I didn't know where William had been, he said, but I sure didn't want him in my room. A few nights later, Michelle awoke to take a trip to the bathroom. Casting a wary eye at William, she found him in his usual spot on the chair. On entering the bathroom, she noticed that the toilet paper roll was empty, so she returned to the hall, where a new package was in the linen closet just outside the bathroom. Once back in the hall, she yelped in alarm. William was crumpled on the floor, about 4 feet in front of his chair. To me, she said, it looked like William had climbed down, headed for the open door of my room, but stopped when I came out of the bathroom. Michelle ran back into her room and huddled in her bed. The bathroom would wait until morning. She fell into a fitful sleep and woke early with the sun just beginning to stream in through her window. Her need for the bathroom was urgent now, so she hurriedly unlocked and opened the door, and screamed, rousing the rest of her family from their beds, because when she pulled open her door, William fell into the room. He had apparently been leaning against the door, waiting for it to open. Lorraine and Nelson hadn't been oblivious to the goings-on. They couldn't help but notice that their kids had suddenly started locking their doors at night, but they had attributed that to the kids' increasing desire for privacy and the impending rush of puberty. Neither David nor Michelle had mentioned to them their experiences with William, and even though Lorraine had already begun to feel a certain unease about the doll, she never made the connection until the morning Michelle woke her with a scream. But Lorraine had noticed William's inexplicable refusal to stay put weeks earlier. Nearly every day she would have to put William back in his chair at least once, and often several times. She had no idea how the doll could keep tumbling out of its big chair. She wasn't able to knock the doll down without applying enough force to actually fling him from the chair, so she saw no way for him to simply fall out. But fall out he seemed to do, over and over again. One afternoon, a few days before Michelle's morning scream, Lorraine hadn't been feeling well, and so laid down for a brief afternoon nap. She awakened an hour or so later to find William in bed beside her. She was initially quite spooked, but soon deduced that one of the kids who had come home from school while she slept had placed the doll there as a joke. It was only later that she decided otherwise. The day Michelle had her morning encounter with William, Nelson put the doll in the attic. He believed none of what the kids were saying, but agreed to hide the doll away to mollify them, for they were genuinely afraid. He told the story to my mother a few weeks later, and she told him that she'd like to have the doll if Nelson and Lorraine weren't planning to keep it around. Nelson agreed and went to the attic to get it for her, and was unable to find it. Nelson tore the attic apart, but William was gone. That was nearly 10 years ago, and William hasn't turned up again since. This actually just happened recently in the past month. At my boyfriend's house, there's this doll. The doll is very old, plastic, with short brown hair, very creepy. Half of its face is melted into its shoulder, so the look of it gives off a weird vibe. Not even the look, but being around it, the energy is off. It's pretty tall, maybe like 3 feet or so. I didn't really pay attention to it the first couple of times I went over in the last month. My boyfriend's mum actually found the doll in a storage unit. She goes through storage units. They found this doll wrapped up in a bag and decided to take it home with them. When I first picked up the doll, I actually felt kind of scared but comfortable at the same time with it. I'm a very spiritual person, so I knew something was attached to the doll. When I had left their house, I got a call from my boyfriend telling me it was moving around the house and ending up in weird places. He decided to mess around with the doll and threw it down the stairs, to which its leg fell off. Out popped a brown piece of paper. The message written on it was worn off from old age. I went over there a week after and brought the doll upstairs with us, to which the dog was up there and started barking and growling at the doll. But I felt comfortable with it and didn't want to let go of it for some reason. It felt like something came over me and I was attached to the doll. And whatever was attached to the doll. My boyfriend started asking me why I was acting weird and told me to stop and give him the doll. I don't remember how long I was acting like this because I felt like something took over. I kept telling him that Amy will get mad and that she likes me. That's where the doll got its name from. My boyfriend finally took the doll from me and put it in the opposite room from him. Through his vent, you can see the room it was in. The next morning we woke up and the doll was staring right into his room from the vent. I swore to never pick up that doll again because whatever was attached to it isn't good. Ever since then, I've been having dreams about demons and dolls. Just so everyone knows, this will be a long one. A lot of information to state. So I'll just start with some history of the doll that was told to me by the previous owner. She was bought in Monroe, Connecticut, about 30-ish minutes away from the Warrens Occult Museum, at a second-hand store. The owner who bought it felt something was wrong with it and would often wake up with scratches and have nightmares every night. So, she gave it to a friend to sell it on eBay, the man I purchased it from. The man selling it had a few stories, like one for instance where he had family coming over, so he hid the doll in an upstairs closet so his niece didn't see it. The family slept downstairs and the niece woke up at 3 a.m, crying from a nightmare, and she described the doll he had upstairs. She had never been upstairs and had never seen the doll in person. She didn't even know it was there. So after that experience, he wanted to sell the doll, but didn't feel safe with it, so he put it in a storage unit. The company he was storing it in called him, asking for him to come and open the unit for them to prove there was no animal in it, as the security guard heard banging and movement in the storage locker at night. I, being very interested in paranormal, having a collection of Ouija boards, a haunted music box, and an exorcism kit from the 70s, decided to purchase this doll. And when it first arrived, the second I took it out of the box, all 4 of my dogs started growling very, very aggressively and moving backwards away from the doll. To clarify, my dogs love everyone. If a stranger broke into my house to rob us, they would greet him with wagging tails and licks. So this was very odd for them. As I stated earlier, I have an exorcism kit. With this kit, there is a cross that is almost locked in place with 2 pieces of metal. And around 30 minutes after removing the doll from the box, I heard a noise from upstairs. I went upstairs to investigate. It was the cross. The cross had been removed from the kit, and fallen off my shelf and onto the floor. I was the only one home, and all the dogs were downstairs with me. My room door was closed. Ever since this experience, my family has been scared with the doll, so I put the doll back into the box and sealed it with salt and put it in the garage of my old house. I moved out with my girlfriend, and my family still lives there. I unfortunately forgot about it. As I was packing in a hurry, I forgot to get stuff in the garage. Nothing has happened since then, and I will be returning to get the doll soon, as my family will be moving soon. My apologies if this was hard to read. I'm not a very big English guy. These experiences are exactly how I remember them, and I personally am not afraid of the doll. I know I should be, but ever since I was young, I've loved everything paranormal. I even see spirits and auras all the time. I feel the evil in the doll, but it has no power over me, so therefore, I show no fear. Update. After I moved, my mother moved into her now ex-boyfriend's house. Let's call him Logan. And she put the doll in a shed. Not every night, but a lot of times throughout the week. They would look outside late at night, and the door to the shed would be open. One time when Logan went outside to close the door, he heard something move in the shed. So he went inside to check what the noise was about. When he was inside, he couldn't find anything that could have made the noise, but he said he felt uncomfortable and cold, so he quickly went to leave. Just as he did, 4 truck tires that were sitting on a shelf fell right on top of where he was just standing. Yes, this could have been a coincidence, but it felt like it wasn't especially, since the doll was also sitting on that shelf. After my mother broke up with Logan, she moved into an apartment, and she put the doll into a closet. She has told me nothing has really happened since then, but when she is alone, she hears footsteps and knocks. And the last few nights, she has been waking up around 3 a.m, hearing noises in her room, but can never see or find anything. I will be visiting in January, and will be bringing the doll back home with me when I leave. I lived with my grandma and grandpa from the age of 8 to 14. So my grandma collected dolls of all kinds and kept them in the guest bedroom. She had over 100 dolls, a lot of them being porcelain, but some of the dolls were old, unsavory looking dolls. And the one that creeped me out the most, was one of those ventriloquist dolls, basically the same one featured on Goosebumps. Anyway, my bedroom was right next to the guest bedroom. And when I first moved in, I was not really bothered by the dolls, maybe because I was younger and always distracted by other things. As I got older, I started to get a really bad feeling from that room, and would start shutting the guest room at night because when I had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I would have to look at that room coming back. But when I did eventually get up to go to the bathroom, the door would be open, knowing full well that I had closed it before I went to bed, and my grandparents claimed to not be responsible. When I was 12, one of my grandma's friends had passed away, and she had taken a lock of hair from that friend, now dead, and attached it to the head of one of her oldest dolls. Soon after, I started to hear voices coming from that room at night, and every time I would go past the room and peek in, I felt all the eyes of the dolls were staring straight into my soul. When I was 13, I started to get really bad nightmares and would wake up to the bed shaking. I would jump out of bed and it would continue to shake, and I would be too much of a chicken to wake my grandparents up to tell them about it, because their answer to everything is to pray for deliverance and ask God to cast away the nightmares, because the only kind of spirit is the Holy Spirit. These episodes of bed shaking and constant voices coming from the doll room never stopped, but the last straw for me was the black shadow that would fly across my room. So I started to always sleep with something over my eyes, and still do to this day. I ended up moving in with my aunt after it had gotten to the point of me not wanting to go to my room at all. I'm terrified of dolls to this day. They are all evil bastards. Summer before last, my boyfriend and I took a road trip to Omaha, Nebraska, with the main purpose of visiting the Museum of Shadows. We're both somewhere between a believer and a skeptic, and thought it would be a great experience for us. He even paid the $20 to rent a spirit box to use as we walked around the museum. If you haven't visited the Museum of Shadows, I'd recommend it, even if only because I found it very cathartic. It's mostly dolls with tragic stories attached to them, but walking around reading all the stories of suffering and sadness families associated with many of these items was very heart-opening, for lack of a better way to word it. Some items I felt were just creepy, and that's where people's associated haunting came from when people owned them. I believe sometimes people create their own hauntings by just being afraid of an object. Same with the dolls owned by children who have passed. The families are just so saddened and grieve so hard that they begin to assign their child's spirit to those items. It's so sad, but really made me feel a great connection to people I didn't even know, which I think is great for the spirit, however sad. So our spirit box was not giving us anything. Literally, not a single intelligible word. We were not angry or disappointed. It was sort of a neat if we hear something, but understandable if we don't sort of thing, because we sort of assumed a majority of items in there could not be haunted. They've got this doll, Demas, and when I say my heart rate increased just typing her name, I'm not lying. She lives in a chicken wire cage toward the back of the first floor of the museum. She is scary looking, not a normal looking doll. I got uneasy just when I saw her, and this is in a building of frightening dolls. Maybe that's intentional though. Maybe they put her in the cage to raise your apprehension. There is a sign above her that says if you choose to speak to her, always say goodbye, which of course you should do with any spirit, but Demas is apparently particularly malicious. I'm a pretty bold soul, so as we're standing there together with the spirit box, I decided I wanted to talk with her. "Hello, Demas," I said, and the spirit box just kept clicking. I don't know what to talk to her about, but I'm always worried about lost spirits, so I decided to say, "Are you okay?" And without hesitation, the spirit box said, "Amanda." Very clearly. My boyfriend and I both heard it. I said, "Did it just..." And he was like, "Yes, absolutely, it said your name." I said above that I'm brave, but I was immediately filled with a sense of dread. Something about it saying my name and that we'd gotten absolutely nothing else out of the box the whole time was terrifying, and I do not scare easily. I didn't continue the conversation, I just said, "Goodbye, Demas," and ushered my boyfriend away from her because it was so uncomfortable with her following that. Just now I went through their Facebook feed to see if I still felt the same about her, and saw an event where they let people hold her. I've never felt so appalled, seeing such innocent-seeming photographs. That doll is the only item I've ever encountered that I am sure is 100% haunted, and maybe even malicious. A few people seemed to like my first doll encounter, so I thought I would add my other two here. Dolls are no longer welcome in my house, and I live with my sister from the first story. We are close, and don't care if you believe any of these stories, but it's nice to get it off my chest. Story 1. I was around 12, and Mum called me in to open a box. I asked what it was, and my mum had no idea, just that it was from an old family friend. Upon opening it, I saw a porcelain doll, dressed up to look Scottish with brown hair. Both Mum and I got bad vibes from it, having had a fear of dolls from what happened when I was 8. I backed away, Mum not wanting to waste a nice gift, placed it on top of the bookcase. It was in view every time I walked down the hall, I hated it. Over the next few weeks, I had nightmares of the doll climbing down and killing me. I ended up shoving it in a dresser drawer until the skip came. We were cleaning out the attic and ripping up carpet. All the time I noticed Tugger would be flipped around to face the door. He was the one thing I knew was on my side. On the day of the skip, I threw it in, and hearing it shatter was a relief, until Mum asked how I got scratched. My fears were justified. Once the skip had taken everything away, everything went back to normal. Story 2. For Christmas, my sister got a toy Barbie plane set with 3 Barbies and 1 Ken. We shared a room, so I was forced to sleep, knowing something I feared was in there with us. My sister loved the toys. She was around 8 or 9 at the time. I was forced to play with her, hiding my fears. She has mild autism and I didn't want to make her upset. At one point, she asked me if I had turned Tugger around, which made me drop the Barbies. I knew if he reacted, something bad was going to happen. Over the next few months, my sister played with them so much. It was worrying. This all changed when I had to pee during dinner and saw the Barbies sitting up, when she had left them lying down to dry. Her logic, not mine. I called out saying it wasn't funny. She came in just as all the heads turned towards us. We screamed and quickly grabbed them, chucking them in the trash. Mum didn't question it. Our mum did wonder if some kind of guardian angel or deceased relative had attached itself to Tugger. I have no idea even to this day what Tugger is, but at least he's a good guy. I'm a huge porcelain doll collector and have been doing that for years. A few years ago, I went thrift shopping for some new dolls. When I was walking in the store, I saw this beautiful Chinese-looking doll. I immediately knew that I wanted it, because I didn't have a doll like that yet. When I went to grab the doll, I got chills all over my body, and something told me not to buy it. Yet, I still did because I really liked it. And I'm impulsive. If I want it, I'll get it. I took the doll home and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, having the feeling something was staring at me. I looked behind me, and the first thing my eyes crossed with was my new doll. I never get scared at night from any of my dolls, but it took me some hours to get back to sleep. This was going on for a few days where I constantly felt anxious if I was around that doll. One night I had a terrible nightmare, and in the nightmare I kept seeing frames of the doll, laughing as she did terrible things to family members. When I woke up, I knew that was the last straw. In my dream I burned the doll, but I've decided to put it in the trash bin as soon as possible. After that, I never had any bad experiences with the doll ever again. No nightmares, no feeling randomly anxious. Do you guys think this was something paranormal? Or was my mind just playing tricks with me? So I begin this story with a small briefing. Only 3 people in my life have heard me tell it, and one of those 3 being my mother. She believes this story to be false, and that I simply made something up because I was young. Well, I say this. I am now 28 and I still believe what I saw, and what happened to me all those years ago. The year is 2004, when I was 12 years old. I had a best friend at this age, and my best friend was my closest cousin. We were inseparable. Whenever we could hang out, we did. One Friday after school, my sister was nice enough to take me home rather than ride the bus. She also picked up my cousin as well, who, for the sake of the story, I'll call Laura. We go to Laura's house first, to get permission from her parents to hang out with me over the weekend. They agree, and Laura's older sister, who's around the same age as my sister, also tags along with us. We get back to my parents' house and my mother asked if I would want to stay the weekend at my grandparents' to spend some time with them. I told her I didn't mind, but I would need to call Laura's parents to also see if they were okay with it as well, since Laura was our guest. Laura's parents once again agree, and so I begin to pack my things for the trip. I loved my grandparents more than anything. They were such kind and noble people. My grandmother being the nicest person I've ever known. I know that sounds cliche, but in my lifetime, I've never heard my grandmother curse or talk down to anyone. Anyway, we arrive at my grandparents' home. My parents say their pleasantries and leave. Laura and I spend a few hours just talking to our beloved grandparents about how we're doing and life in general. Eventually, my grandmother, like all grandmothers, feels the need to feed us, so she begins preparing dinner. While grandmother is busy, Laura and I decide to go to what we call the grandkids' room. Basically, the grandkids' room is where my grandparents keep all the toys and various knickknacks for the grandchildren. The same room also housed her famous Super Nintendo, which is what Laura and I were going in there for. As I started to load up a Ninja Turtle game, I noticed something in this basket of baby dolls my grandmother kept for smaller grandkids. Inside this basket was this ugly, wild-haired, wicked-looking baby doll. I immediately stopped what I was doing and pointed out the doll to Laura. She had the same look on her face as I did when she saw it. Laura was always more curious than I was, so she walked over to it to examine it closer. After about 5 minutes of us looking at this doll, we noticed it has the odd effect of its eyes changing color, cycling through different shades of greens and blues. With the doll already being creepy enough and its eyes adding to it, we both ran out of the room and exclaimed to our grandmother our distaste of her doll. We began to interrogate her, asking her where she got it and why she got it, etc. She just laughed and told us she found it at a yard sale, and that there was nothing more to the doll than it just being a doll. Over the course of a couple of hours and eating dinner, we forgot about the doll and continued our conversations with grandmother. Around 11 p.m. or so, my grandfather had something happen with his pacemaker, so my grandmother had to get him to the hospital. We were in the south, so around the age of 12 back then was old enough to be left home alone. Laura and I watched as our grandparents left the home in a hurry. Laura tried to go to sleep, but I wasn't quite tired yet. I stayed in the living room and watched TV with my concern for my grandfather laying heavy on my mind. TV wasn't doing enough to keep me occupied, so I had to think of something else to do. Then a thought occurred. I remembered the doll and how it gave Laura and I a really eerie vibe. I sped into the guest bedroom and woke up Laura. I told her we should see if that doll is haunted. She looked at me, and once again, with her being more curious, she smiled and told me she would accompany me to play with the doll. We went into the grandkids' room and found the doll, still laying face up in the same basket we found it in. I grabbed the doll and said, first we should test it. We should set it on the couch here in this room and leave it and see if it moves. Laura laughed and said, if this doll moves, I will probably get rid of it for grandmother. I nodded in agreement and we left the doll sitting in the middle of the couch in the room. We went back to the living room and continued watching TV. Laura asked how long we should keep the doll alone before checking in on it. I replied, let's check in about 30 minutes. We both sat, quiet and stone-faced, as we patiently waited for 30 minutes to pass. Finally, the time came, and we both slowly entered the room to check on the doll. To both of our surprise, the doll had, in fact, moved. Rather than being in the middle of the couch, it was sitting at the far right edge. Laura looked at me, her eyes wide and her mouth agape. We then both laughed because we literally could not believe what just happened. There has to be an explanation, I remarked to break the silence. Laura said, it's just us here, and we both sat in the living room. What explanation can there be? I felt my stomach turn and said, "Okay, well, this time, let's leave it where it is and then check on it in 10 minutes. For some reason in my 12-year-old brain, I thought if I gave it less time, then surely it wouldn't move again. 10 minutes went by like hours, and so we once again go back into the room where the doll was. To our disbelief, the doll moved again, and this time was sitting back in the middle of the couch with its head turned slightly towards the door, as if it were trying to look at us. At that point, Laura freaked, ran into the room and grabbed the doll. She threw it at me and yelled, "Keep it with us until Grandmother and Papa get back from the hospital. We have to tell them about this." I agreed and made sure the doll stayed in our sight until our grandparents returned. Finally, after about 3 hours, our grandparents were back home. In order to make sure we did not disturb our grandfather after his hospital visit, we waited until he went to bed to confront Grandmother about our experience. We told her what had happened and that she needed to get rid of the doll because we were afraid of it. Once again, she laughed at us. She laughed and told us we were just sleepy and that everything seemed scary at night to children. Laura looked at me, and I could tell she was frustrated that we weren't being believed, as was I. Our grandmother agreed to at least put the doll somewhere where we wouldn't find it to help ease our minds. For some reason, that made us feel better and safe. The night goes on and we all sleep in until 8 or so the next morning. Saturday goes by pretty fast and we spend time with our grandparents and almost seemingly forgetting about the doll. Then comes Saturday night. Laura and I proceed to go to bed, having not mentioned the doll once the entire day. I drift off to sleep pretty quickly, and at around 2 a.m., I hear a loud thud. When I was young, I was a light sleeper, and sudden noises easily woke me. I sat up, seeing nothing, and went back to sleep. I don't know how long I was asleep for this time, but what woke me was a tug on my sheets, and what felt like something walking on my legs, like a small cat. I immediately thought about the doll, and instant fear overcame me. I could feel my face turn pale, as if my soul was attempting to escape my body. However, I somehow managed to gather enough courage to remove the sheet from over my face and tried to look at what was walking or crawling on my bed. As I am careful not to move, I tried to move only my eyes just enough to look down at my feet. What I saw to this day still haunts me. I saw the doll, standing on me, moving its head in slow left to right motion, as if it was looking for something. The doll was also holding something, but I could not tell what it was. I was too scared to care. I very slowly turned my head to look at Laura. I was hoping she was awake and seeing this too. Laura rolled over on her side, facing me, with the sheets pulled over her head, but her eyes still visible. I could tell she was looking at the doll too. With that validation, I moved my head to see only the ceiling. I closed my eyes and told myself it was my imagination and to go back to sleep. Somehow, I managed to drift away and woke up at 7 in the morning. However, upon waking up, I noticed sprinkles of what looked like bloodstains randomly on my sheets. I immediately began freaking out and threw myself out of bed. It was then I felt a pain in my leg. I looked at my left leg and saw that I had a pretty noticeable wound. It was like a scratch that was just deep enough to bleed. I turned back at Laura, who was still sleeping, and could hear my grandmother making commotion in the kitchen. I started to sprint towards the kitchen. As I'm making my way down the hall, I see something on the floor. Right in the middle of the hallway was the doll, laying face down. At this point, I'm almost about to cry. I run past it and confront my grandmother frantically. I tell her everything that happened during the night, while on the verge of tears. And yet again she disbelieves my story and told me it was a nightmare, telling me I scratched myself on my leg in my sleep and that I was overthinking things. Laura even told her of her account, and grandmother still was not convinced. She just thought we were trying to be mischievous children. After about 2 hours of us begging and pleading our grandmother to get rid of the doll, she finally agrees and decides to dispose of it. Laura and I both sigh in relief and decide to not spend another night there until we knew that doll was gone. Both our parents picked us up on Sunday, and we went in our separate ways. Months seemed to pass until I finally asked my grandmother what happened to that doll. She told me that she gave it to one of her friends for their grandchildren, and I felt terror. I told my grandmother I feared for the safety of the old woman and the grandchildren because of that doll, but my grandmother laughed and told me not to worry. I expected her to throw it away, but instead, she gave it to someone else. And now the doll would wreak havoc on that family. Here I am now, 28 years old, still telling this story and remembering it as if it happened yesterday. I do not care if you believe me or not, but I know what I saw that night, and my cousin Laura is also a witness. I don't know what happened to the family who got the doll, but I hope that it never harmed anyone, and that it's been destroyed since. When I was like 6 or 7, I lived in a small town called Red Bluff, California. I lived with my mother, my only blood brother. I say that because I'm adopted now, and my mother's boyfriend, who was an absolutely horrible man. In order for all this to make sense, I have to tell you a little backstory on him. Let's call him Dan. We moved from Oregon, where we were born, when we were like 5 or so. We moved in with my mum's dad, who introduced them. Although Dan already had a girlfriend who had a female daughter my age, to get to one of the main points without too much detail, Dan is probably still an active pedophile. I guarantee he molested her, and he also molested me for 2 years. Anyway, eventually that woman and her daughter disappeared. Just up and left, I guess. And then my mum and him hooked up, got an apartment together, and he was just the most evil man ever. He would take my brother and I to the middle of nowhere when my mum was at work, but wouldn't let us see where we were going. And he'd dig things up. He had a gun wrapped in duct tape when we came back one time, and then the trailer park manager died shortly after that. And then we went to the middle of nowhere again. But anyway, now for the main part. I was playing outside one day with all the other neighborhood kids, and I went inside to go to the bathroom. My mum was at work, so just Dan was in the house. My brother was playing outside. He said the lady next door moved and she'd seen me playing outside and thought I would like this doll as a gift. It was a Native American Indian doll. Porcelain. It was authentic and had beautiful beads in her hair, and I thought it was cool. It was about 2.5 feet tall, on a little stand thing. I was like, okay, cool, I'll put it in my room. I put the doll on an entertainment center, visible from all the way down the hall. I put it right in the middle, up against the wall. I shared a room with my brother, and it was straight down the hall, that had full-size mirrors on it, and the bathroom was a few feet in front of our door, but directly down the hall. That night, he had a thing for forcing us to watch terrifying horror movies, at least for a 5 and 6-year-old, and get off on us being scared. So during the movie, I had to go to the bathroom, so I got up to go, and the doll was standing on the edge of the entertainment center facing towards me. It was completely moved. I thought maybe Dan or Tyler got up and moved it, and I didn't notice, so I didn't mind it and put it back. At the end of the movie, when we were going to bed, scared already from the movie, we were both surprised to find the doll was standing by the bathroom door this time. I was sure that no one got up for the rest of the movie too. So my brother and I were certainly unsettled, but we went to bed anyway, putting the doll back in the same place on the entertainment center. We had bunk beds, and Tyler, my brother, had the top bunk. We also had a tall dresser next to our bed, so Tyler had something to have a light on. But in the morning, I woke up to him screaming because the doll was standing on top of the dresser at perfect eye level for when he woke up. It was small stuff like that for a while, just being in different places when we'd come back in the house, because we spent most of our days outside playing. We got grounded one time for a week, and we had this tiny wooden timeout bench that looked like a super miniature park bench, but the backrest was literally the words "time out" in cursive, and it was so uncomfortable. We weren't allowed to sleep or even lay down when we were grounded, or do anything. Just sit on the bench or edge of my bed and stare at the wall. We'd take turns sleeping. One time we both fell asleep and the doll was in front of us, and the worst part is, we were stuck in that room with the doll. I swear, I was hearing shit or something because we'd hear whispers and like something was scratching porcelain. We also don't remember a lot of that time either, which is weird. But I couldn't take it anymore. When we all had left the house to go visit Mum at work on her lunch break, when we came back, the doll was floating in the middle of the room with his hair all twisted up and messy, and his arm was pointed at us. Its arms weren't supposed to move, and Dan saw it too. He lied to my mum. He said we made it up. I lost my shit, and when I managed to go back to the room, it was in perfect condition where it was supposed to be. My brother and I had also defaced it multiple times before, tore off its eyelashes, cut its hair, its clothes, and it always ended up in perfect condition. That's the scariest part. It always came back perfect, but this time I lost it and literally bashed it against the floor and the wall to break the porcelain. Although it would only crack off in pieces. It was filled with cotton stuff or whatever. I wanted to throw it away in the dumpster, but Dan wouldn't let me at first, and I fought him on it. I accidentally kicked him because he was flinging me around, and he threw me across the room, and eventually said, "Fine, I don't care." So, sobbing, I took the doll by the leg, holding it as far away from me as possible, and took it to the dumpster. I banged it on the dumpster a few more times and picked up as much of the glass as I could. I threw it away and closed the dumpster. I swear, I waited all night at that window for the dump truck, just watching and waiting. I thought I was in the clear for like 2 weeks. It was gone, and I finally was at peace again. I went to get my bike from an area only we had access to because Dan was the apartment manager. Maybe that's why my mum liked him, I don't know. But I went to go get it, and in the tall grass, I saw a dent. As I got closer, the doll was standing without a stand and half a bloody arm wrapped in a cast, pointing at me. I screamed and ran inside. Dan wouldn't believe me or go back there, so I had to get it and prove it myself. So I went back, and the doll was still there, but in perfect condition. I brought it back, sobbing, and I don't exactly remember what he said, but he made me go to my room, and he put the doll in our closet with the sliding wooden doors that's shut, so you can't see inside. He put a towel over the doll before closing it, and then took another towel. He fluffed it out like if you were to try and fold it, but just kept doing that towards the closet. Then he motioned it towards the top bunk and threw the towel on the bed. He told me to go to bed. It was the middle of the day, still sunny out. I said I didn't want to, and he screamed at me. The closet was still closed. I climbed up onto the top bunk and went to get under the covers, but when I pulled the blanket down, the doll was in the bed, and I started crying. He told me to get in bed and pull the covers over my head, so I got in bed with the doll and did so. I literally don't remember a single damn thing about the doll ever since that moment. I still lived with it for a long time. The only way I escaped it was when I got hauled off by the police to go to foster care because I finally cracked that he was molesting me to my mum. I only ever saw it once again, years later with our adopted family. At an estate sale in a giant warehouse, there was a room with lots of clothes racks, and all the way in the back of that room, I could see the doll standing on top of the shelf. I immediately turned around and didn't enter the room again. Seeing it made my eyes instantly tear up, and I felt like a ghost went through me. I told my brother not to go in there, and we stayed as far away as we could. I didn't want it finding us again. Anyway, that's the scariest paranormal thing that's ever happened to me. And I'll never, ever forget. Even though as I get older I lose bits and pieces. That's why I wanted to tell it here. It's been a while since I've told the story. So this happened a long time ago. My family and I love going to garage sales and thrift stores. My parents are very friendly and polite, and people like them pretty quick. So they have been offered several times to take stuff for free, and even had got these type of deals. You can have everything for free, but you have to take all the stuff. So we have ended up with a truck filled with random garage sale items. One time my mum and I were in her bedroom checking the loot of one of these types of deals. We were having a good time while sorting all the stuff. We got to a big trash bag that was filled with dolls. There was a lot of them, so I decided to just open the entire bag and put them all on the bed. So we started checking the dolls, one by one, and choosing what to keep for my sister, what to give away, and what to throw away, since most of these deals included taking some trash. But we didn't care, it was fun. We have a half bag sorted out when we get to this tumbling doll that supposedly can do flips. My mum likes it, looks like new, and seems like a fun toy for my sister, so she wants to keep it. She asks me to test it to see the doll tumbling, but the batteries seem to be dead. I tried again now with brand new batteries, but still no luck. After a few minutes I conclude that the doll must be broken and that it didn't work, so I take out the batteries and place the old ones back in and put the doll back on the bed, and we go back to sorting stuff. 15 minutes pass. My mum and I were taking a break, just chatting, when suddenly we hear this loud noise that sounded like gears and an overcharged motor. We look at the bed and the sound is coming from the doll, and right in front of both of us, the doll turns his head at me and says, "Mama." The movement was so abrupt that I even feel the bed shaking a little. My mum and I look at each other, and I saw her face turning white. I just punched the doll as hard as I could. It landed on the other side of the bedroom. We went immediately to the kitchen to calm down and explain what just happened to my dad. After a few minutes, I go back to the room with my dad to investigate, trying to find out what just happened. Then my mum enters in full rage mode, goes to the doll and puts it in a plastic bag. She asks my dad to take it to the trash out of the house right now. My parents are religious, so after that, they were praying and blessing the entire house for almost an hour. Never seen my mum that scared. It truly felt like a scene from a horror movie. I expected the doll to get up and attack me at that moment. I don't really believe in paranormal stuff, even though I've had a couple of experiences that really scared me. And up to this day, I have no explanation for it, and this is one of them. Growing up, I always hated dolls and was scared of them, even to the point of having really messed up nightmares. Good thing this happened when I was older, around 16, or I'd probably be still traumatized. What still bugs me is that even if I find a rational explanation for why the doll worked again with dead batteries, with the power switch off and by itself, the doll wasn't a baby doll. It was a gymnastic doll that was supposed to do flips. As it wasn't new and had no box, I probably will never know if this was one of its features, and I'm okay not knowing. When I was around the age of 5, I received a life-size doll for Christmas. On the box, the doll was called the Wispy Walker doll. It was about the same height as me with blonde hair and overalls. The strangest part about this gift was no one could recall who got me this doll, as it was labelled from Santa. Even years later, when I asked my family who got me the doll, no one could remember who. I instantly did not like the doll because it freaked me out. I left the doll in the back of my closet far away from all my other toys. Years passed, and the doll remained in the back of the closet, untouched. When I was around 7 years old, I began to play hide and seek with my mum in our home. I decided to hide behind the door in my bedroom, which is right in front of my closed closet door. I gasp when I come to find the walking wispy doll out of a box, placed behind my bedroom door with one eye open and another shut. I screamed and ran to my mum crying. I tell her, "Mum, big sis is playing a prank on me and put the walking doll behind my door to scare me." My mother, confused, explains that my sister had left for camp this morning with her class. My mum walks over to check behind the door, and there's no doll. My stomach drops, and I am at a loss for words. "Maybe you are just seeing things," my mum told me. We opened the closet door to check if the doll is inside the box. It was, but outside of the box, just standing next to it. I'd never taken a doll out of its original packaging. I eventually got rid of the doll, but every time I remember this story, I get chills. I've always loved the paranormal, even as a little girl. I grew up with horror movies and find the paranormal fascinating. On to the first paranormal experience I ever had. I don't have any photos or anything because this happened when I was in 3rd grade in 2003. And I didn't have anything to record with or even take pictures with at this time. Anyway, I was watching the 1994 version of Little Woman with my mum and grandmother in my room, when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye on my bookshelf where my dolls are. The air was off, but I could see one of the dolls' dresses billowing around her, and one of my other dolls was reaching out to her. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks. I should mention that my mum rearranged them that day and had them all facing the same direction. Skip to the next day. I had walked out of my room because my grandmother had called me to ask me something. I walked back in and all my dolls were turned in different directions and facing different ways. I ran out of my room screaming. My mum didn't believe me until I showed her. She fixed them again, but my room had always been off, and I had obtained more dolls from a family friend a few years later, and this is when things got weird. I have 2 musical dolls, and they would go off randomly sometimes. I started to feel like I was watched and I wasn't alone, but I brushed it off as paranoia because I never experienced anything major other than some of my dolls appearing to move every once in a while. Skip again to college. After years of dealing with minimal doll movement, something changed. I was in my room one night and I felt something breathe down my neck. It scared me so much that I didn't sleep in my room that night. My parents divorced when I was 15, and my dad was dating a girl who loved the paranormal and was also a medium. I asked her when she came over to check out and cleanse my room. The moment she stepped into my room, she looked at me and asked if there was a doll in my closet. My heart sank because a family friend had given me a porcelain baby doll that was practically life-size, but it had no eyes. That was the one in my closet, and she confirmed that was the one she was getting negative vibes from. She prayed over my room, saged it, and I still have the rose quartz in my room that she gave me. I got rid of the majority of my dolls and don't feel anything in it. This is just one of many experiences I've had and thought I would share. I still constantly check my bookshelf just to make sure. It's been almost 2 years since I got rid of my haunted dolls, but I don't think I'll ever forget. I don't care how many people believe me, but this is a doll-related thing that has stuck with me for years. It happened when I was 8 years old. My grandmother, who is now dead, gave my sister, who at the time was 3, a doll in a country-style dress with brown hair in curly pigtails. I thought it looked creepy, but my sister hugged it and sung Incy Wincy Spider. Chills ran down my spine. I went to our room and hugged Tugger, my toy dog, who growled when you pulled a sock in his mouth. I'd always treated him with respect, like if friends were over, I would make sure they never touched him for fear of Tugger breaking. Other times I would watch TV with him. My mum thought it was odd, though she did find it cute to see Tugger always in my bed with my pillows at night. Around the 6th month of this doll being in my house, I had to get up at 2 in the morning to pee, and I heard a creepy song coming from the doll as it walked up the hallway. I froze, too scared to scream or cry, when suddenly I heard growling coming from behind me. I thought it was coming from my dog Toby, who knew how to open the back door, but quickly realized that Mum had locked it. Scared, I turned my head to see Tugger in the hallway. It was then I ran and covered my head. I heard them fighting. How no one else woke up, I have no idea. I must have fallen asleep, for I awoke to Mum asking me why I was under the covers, and told her, but she didn't believe me. I thought I must have been dreaming, but later that day my sister came up to Mum with a doll in hand, saying that it no longer worked. Around the same time I noticed a scratch on Tugger's eye. I knew it was real, and my mum was stunned in the following years. Several bad toys have been chased off by Tugger. I'm now 27 and still have Tugger. His voice box no longer works, thanks to a washing machine mishap at the hands of grandmother, and I still love him. He is now always in my bed, by my pillow, keeping me and my family safe. This happened during my childhood in Matamoros, Tamaulipas. I lived with my family in a quiet neighborhood where everything went smoothly. I had a happy childhood. Due to the economic situation in the 1970s, many people were forced to migrate to other parts of the country, or even to the United States in search of opportunities. For this reason, many houses were abandoned, and during the moves, it was common for our former neighbors to leave things forgotten. So much was the migration in the area that, for both my friends and me, one of our favorite games was urban exploration. We would go into vacant houses with the desire to search through the garbage to see what kind of objects had been left behind. Of course, our main objective was toys. As we explored the adjoining houses, we had to expand to the point that we already had to ride a bicycle to find more abandoned houses. On one occasion, I do not remember the date, we were not 5 blocks from our house when we saw an uninhabited house. It already had the for rent sign, and several large bags with forgotten objects had been left in the garbage. We started to rummage through the bags, but among some crap, one of my friends found the head of a doll, one of those that open and close their eyes. The head was that of a baby, had no hair, and had a happy expression. But when you stared at it, you felt an inexplicable discomfort. It was very striking. Between jokes and games, we decided to take it with us, and we put it on a tree that was at the entrance of some soccer fields that we used to go to. Since that day, we felt a very ugly vibe, in addition to being able to feel a very heavy feeling. But not everything ends here, because for some strange reason, we were very attracted to it. So much that we even quarreled. I fought with my friends because I wanted to take it to my house and not leave it here. But the greed had not only erupted in me, but in all of my friends. Such was the extent of our disputes that there were days when we did not speak. I felt a certain responsibility since I was the one who had started everything. So after reconsidering, I went to look for my friends to apologize to them, and everything returned to normal. On one occasion, we were playing marbles and Mario, my best friend, exclaimed scared, "The little head rolled its eyes." But since we already knew that it could open and close them, we did not give it importance. But Mario insisted again. Then, we saw that the toy did not move the eyes, opening and closing, but moved them from side to side and even blinked. Of course, we got scared and ran in terror, and we did not step again onto the soccer field. After a few days, we got together again to decide what we were going to do with that thing. We had to get rid of it, but nobody had the courage to touch it, so we decided to go with an adult friend. 2 streets from where we lived, there was a house of a man named Valentin. He was very kind and used to play soccer with us. We knew his children, who were younger than us, because we had been invited to his birthday parties previously. We went to look for him. We knew at what time we would find him, and we told him everything. Obviously, he did not believe us. We took him to the soccer field and showed him the head. He took it carefree and watched it closely for a few minutes, then exclaimed, "I'm taking it to my home. My daughter has some of her headless dolls. It will help me fix one." So he took the head and put it in a grocery bag and went home. The days passed without incident, and the tranquility returned to our circle of friends. In fact, we returned to play on the soccer field. However, 15 days had passed since we saw Valentin, and we had never heard from him again. So we went to look for him at his house. We got to his house and we were playing for about half an hour, but nobody opened it. We could hear the TV was on, as well as see some lights inside the house. In fact, his truck was parked in the garage. That seemed strange to us. The subsequent days that we went to look for him, the same thing happened, and we still did not hear from Valentin or his family. We discussed this situation with our parents and our neighbors, but they did not care. In fact, my mother told me that perhaps he had to immigrate like others. Concerned about his situation, we decided to investigate on our own. We jumped over the fence and went inside his house. When we entered, we found the lights on in some rooms. The television was also on, and in fact, the dinner plates were on the table. The food was still there. It seemed as if all the family had just vanished, since all their belongings were there. Their clothes, children's toys, including his wallet, was upon the television, next to his car keys. We left everything as it was and left the house with great fear, sensing that something bad had happened to them. We tried to see how to file a missing persons report with the police, but this was impossible, since we were minors, and when we were finally able to convince our parents to support us, the complaint could not be taken since we were not related to them. Thus, the days became weeks, then months, and we did not stop searching. On one occasion that I was returning from school, I saw that there were people in Valentin's house, and thinking it was him, my heart filled with joy and I ran to meet him. But when I reached the threshold of the door, I saw that they were different people. These people were family members who came after not hearing from them. The man who said he was Valentin's brother-in-law, and after introducing me to him, asked me questions to find out if I knew anything about his whereabouts, to which I replied, no. I accompanied him to ask the neighbors if they knew anything, and finally, a neighbor could give a reason. An old woman who lived in the house across the street told Valentin's brother-in-law that a few months ago, after 9 o'clock at night, she heard a scream that woke her up, and as the window of her room faces the street, she leaned out to see what happened, but did not notice anything strange. Minutes later, she saw that Valentin rushed out and started the truck. Immediately after, he ran back to the house and was not seen anymore. And after that, she did not know anymore. The woman said that the car's engine was on all night, and around 1 in the morning she heard that the engine was turned off. When the lady went out to carry out her morning activities, she saw that the truck was still there, and when she heard the television turned on, she thought that everything was continuing normally. But since then, she has never heard from Valentin or his family. With the passage of time, Valentin's house also became an uninhabited house. For respect, we never got into it. However, other people did, and they started taking things. First, the truck disappeared. Then the appliances, furniture, and so on were stolen, until it was completely empty. Over the years, the property was auctioned off, and new tenants came to live. My friends and I grew up, and each one made his life. But to date, I have not stopped wondering what happened to Valentin and his family, and if that doll's head had something to do with their disappearance. When I was 9, my family was clawing their way out of poverty. My dad would go by garage sales, or his co-workers would give him toys that their own children no longer wanted. So while we were poor, Dad desperately did his best to spoil us in the little ways he could. My dad kind of believes in the paranormal, but refuses to acknowledge it when it's time to. Man up and face the problem, he says. Around this time, I was on the cusp of ghost adventures. I loved the mystery and suspense of the show, and while it made me paranoid, it wasn't bad and I barely showed outward fear. This detail is important because at the time, my parents had formed this narrative that watching ghost stuff was making me not function right as a person, which made them delegitimize any real tangible paranoia I had. At some point in my 9-year-old life, my father's co-worker's grandmother gives the co-worker 3 expensive ceramic dolls out of the hundreds that this grandmother had. They all had glass eyes, whose eyelids would move should you lay the doll in a certain position. You could move them with your finger, but the lids rolled back too far to pull. And pulling risked damaging the long eyelashes these dolls had. The first 2 dolls I loved. One was a mermaid and one was a nurse. Because they were ceramic, Dad put them in a box in my closet, so they couldn't get damaged. The third doll, however, Dad placed front and center where I could see it at the top shelf, and it could see me. This doll was bedazzled in a hand-woven Native American getup, with a headdress made from real feathers. The doll's eyes were glass, but with pure crystal pupils. I thought it was gorgeous, but from the get-go, something felt all wrong with this doll. The 2 months this doll sat in my closet watching me, I began hearing a strange tapping on my pillow. Some items on my desk would fall off, and as I'd close my eyes at night, I swear I could see those difficult eyelids close on their own. One night, I thought I could hear crying in the closet. Nothing was there, but I had decided enough was enough. I went to my dad the next day. "Dad, these dolls are so pretty, but the feather one doesn't feel right."
What do you mean, kiddo?
"The feathered one doesn't feel right."
Okay. I'll find a home for that one. Are you sure you don't want that one?
"Just that one." His eyes got a little wide and he left for work. I went to school. Later that night, I was trying to sleep and I heard Dad come into the doorway to check on me. But I looked dead asleep, so he didn't come in. I heard him stand there a while, and he was there for probably 5 minutes. Eventually, I heard him gasp and run.
When I woke up, the doll was gone. I never saw it again, and Dad to this day pretends it never existed. I don't know what he saw that night, but it must have been enough to send that doll into the void. So I'm going to share my story. Honestly, even just talking about it makes me feel uncomfortable, as I feel I'm summoning it. Background info. I've had sleep paralysis since I was a child. Look up what this entails. Usually it's a shadowy figure with a very heavy presence. It sucks. I was 10, just moved to the US, so all we could afford was this very small house, directly across from a cemetery. This probably had nothing to do with it, but it certainly didn't help calm my 10-year-old self. My grandma always gifted me these porcelain dolls, you know the ones. They need to stand to hold them straight, and they are creepy looking, with glassy eyes. I had a shelf in my room, which was in the basement, where I kept this doll collection. They always creeped me out, but since they were gifts, I kept them. One time my grandma brought me this extremely creepy doll. All the other dolls had some colouring in their faces, blushed cheeks, etc. This one didn't. She wore a deep red velvety dress, had extremely pale skin, and glossy, dead-looking blue eyes with straight blonde hair and bangs that were a little too short. She freaked me out. Soon after, I started having extreme sleep paralysis. Prior to this, my experiences were tame and just involved seeing a shadowy figure. Now, I started hearing loud manic laughter, mocking me, telling me that my family couldn't hear me and I couldn't yell for help. Coming from a religious country, I immediately started praying loudly in my mind and yelling in my head that I believed in God. Now, I'm not really that religious. I don't go to church, but I did go to Catholic school for a few years. In this situation, this is all I could think of to scream. This kept reoccurring multiple times a week, to the point I learned to sleep with my television on, and sometimes all the lights on as well, because that would allow me to know the passage of time during the paralysis, and whether I was awake or not. The more I write, the more I'm realizing how absolutely insane this all sounds. I swear this is 100% true. I would tell my mum, and thankfully, she would empathize with me and let me sleep in her bed, even though I was between 10 to 12 this time. The climax was one day, during the daylight after school, I went downstairs, and the feeling of dread that usually came right before I had sleep paralysis came over me. Except this time, I was fully awake and it was daylight. I went downstairs and heard laughter and laughter. It's important I mention that every time I had sleep paralysis, it was this doll that I would see reveal itself to me during the ordeal. I went to my room to find a sticker of an angel ripped in half. It was previously pasted to my bed frame. I ran upstairs, and from there, I couldn't go to the basement alone. I had to either ask my brother to come with, or someone else. We moved my bed upstairs, and I shared a room with my mum. Thankfully, after a few years we moved to a better house a few blocks away. My aunt was helping us move. She has really good intuition. She dreams about people's pregnancies and whatnot. So we never really mentioned what I went through with her. It was something we kept in-house. She stayed behind doing general cleaning, and everyone was at the new house unpacking. When my mum came back to pick up more stuff, my aunt asked her if she had felt or seen anything in the house. My mum asked why, and my aunt casually said, "Oh, I asked because when I was cleaning alone, I saw a small child going around the house. My mum was taken aback, as obviously she knew what I had been claiming, and I even told her I felt it was a young person. That doll did not come with us to the next house. I do still have occasional sleep paralysis, but since I've had them so much, I know all the warning signs and can usually get myself out of it. The laughter never came again though. Background info. There is a small room upstairs in our house where my mum has a small collection of the dolls, with porcelain heads and hands and legs which are almost immovable. They are manufactured to remain in a standing position. This is important. They have been standing on a shelf with their heads straightened for more than 20 years without any moves or falling. They are positioned in such a way that when you are standing directly across from them, they are looking directly to your face. All the incidents meanwhile. The first weird thing happened last year on the 11th of August when I went there looking for an old German dictionary. I was searching in the library at the opposite part of the room and suddenly a doll almost fell on my head. It confused me because there should not be a doll standing on the library. All of them were always on the shelf. I turned around and saw an empty place in a row of the standing dolls on the shelf. But who would do that? My mum has trouble with walking and wasn't upstairs for a couple of years, and my dad goes only to the room with a solar inverter. I put the doll on a table under the window and went away. I returned there on the 19th of August with the idea to put the doll back on the shelf. But immediately after I arrived, I saw that 5 dolls were sitting on the shelf with their heads turned to the window. But the one from the 11th of August remained in an unchanged position. The 4 of them were the closest ones to the door. The 5th one was a doll dressed as a countess in red. I quickly found out that putting them back to the standing position was very difficult. You have to do this very slowly and must be very careful. I did it, but still didn't understand how it would be possible that they had been able to change the position of their bodies and heads on their own, and even looked like someone arranged them. I decided to keep an eye on them. I went to check them out once more that day, and found that my effort to make them standing was useless. That time 6 of them were sitting on the shelf. 5 were the same. The new one dressed as a countess in blue. The new doll's head was turned to the door. The 5 other faced to the window again. I didn't try to put them back to the right position because I was already afraid of them. I ran away from the room. It took courage to go back there at the end of August. The 6 were sitting in the same position, but the doll which I had placed on the table under the window wasn't there. She was standing on the shelf with family albums, which was under the shelf with other dolls. I put the doll back on the table and went away. For a couple of months the dolls didn't move, but when I went there at 9:30 p.m, only the 4 nearest to the door were sitting. 2 countesses are standing again, but how can a doll change position from sitting to standing on her own? I didn't even check the one which should be on the table under the window. No other signs of anything paranormal in the house right now. The dolls are completely covered in dust. If someone living was moving with them, they wouldn't be. My question is, what to do with them? Update. Yesterday I scattered salt at the doorway and put a crucifix on the left side of the table in order to face directly at the dolls. Today I read a comment suggesting to take a picture at least. I took a photo of the doll which has been moving around the room from the shelf with albums and put her on the table to take a picture of her. I came back an hour later and saw the scene didn't look like I left it, and I'm 100% sure nobody was upstairs since I left because I was in the living room the whole time, and from the place where I sat, I would see if somebody went upstairs. The first thing which I noticed immediately was the crucifix stood next to the doll on the right side and was facing me, not the dolls. I checked the picture I took with the position of the doll,
and saw the doll moved as well. Update 2. If anyone is listening to this, the situation is normal. I removed the doll which was moving around the room, and the other dolls remained still since. You want to know her, who she is and where she came from, how she came to be my presence, and the way she has affected my life. Well, if you're looking for a haunting like you see in the movies that fills you with fear deep into your soul, you're reading the wrong story. Because it's never scary when the one who is haunted becomes friends with the spirit, right? Victoria came to me as a gift, along with her friends when I was a small child. From the moment I received her, I could feel she was no ordinary doll, and I could also feel that she was the one in charge. I was 5 or 6 when she first showed herself in a way I'll always remember. I had stopped playing with her because I got a new Barbie that I was infatuated with. I came home and went straight to my room to play with my new Barbie, but she had her head turned the wrong way, her arm at an odd angle. I remember glancing at the shelf where Victoria was kept. She seemed to be looking right at me. Odd occurrences have continued to happen over the years. Small, unexplained things that most would brush off. Like coming home and knowing I had shut my closet doors, but there they were, open. Finding broken toys that I firmly blamed my brother on, that he denied. Realizing that even to this day, Victoria's dress stays completely clean, no dust, even though she is never cleaned, never played with anymore. As I got older, I started to realize the odd things that were happening were from her, or her presence. But, oddly enough, I was never scared. Even thinking about the times she had shown herself, I feel calm. She never meant to cause harm. She has simply wanted to show that she is there. She wants the respect she deserves, and also that a piece of her cares. I truly believe that. Once when I was in high school, I could hear the floorboards creaking upstairs. I could hear distinct footsteps walking in my old bedroom, where Victoria still resided. I had moved to the bigger bedroom across the hall. I knew no one should be home though, so I cautiously started to walk up the stairs. And then I felt it. The presence of Victoria that I hadn't felt in years. And I no longer felt scared of an intruder or a burglar. I felt calm and curious, wondering what Victoria was up to. Walking into my old bedroom is where I found her, sitting in the middle of the room, as clean as the day I got her, despite her being stashed away in the closet on a shelf, forgotten about until now. I simply scooped her up and apologized for not getting her out more, but that I was older and couldn't play with dolls anymore. After that, she almost seemed to just be sad and lonely. There are moments that both my mum and I have been sitting on the bed and we can feel her presence come sit down next to us. She will open doors that are incredibly hard to open, and she will also unlock our dog's cage and let her out during the day. After I had my son, I continued to stay in the house for a few months to have help from my parents with the newborn baby. At first, I had his bassinet next to my bed, and one night, I had just gotten him to sleep, and I was laying there in the dark, trying to fall asleep too, when I heard and felt footsteps come right next to me and my son. I asked my mum what she was doing, having absolutely no doubt in my brain that it was her. I got no reply, so I turned on the light, and there was no one there. But that's when I felt her.
I felt her curiosity about the baby, but I did not feel scared. I knew she was simply curious. Once my son got older, I moved his crib into my old bedroom, where Victoria and the other dolls stay inside the closet. One night, I was laying down. I had just gotten my son to sleep, and I was listening to his soft snores on the baby monitor. Suddenly, I started to hear whispers. The whispers became louder, almost as if the voice was getting closer to the monitor, to my baby. It wasn't a language I could understand. All of a sudden, I could hear my son giggle. All of a sudden, I could hear my son giggle. That's when I got out of bed and went into his room. He was smiling at the closet, the door open that I always kept shut. Victoria staring down at him. When I look back at him, I notice his mobile above his crib is turning, and I had never turned it on. My son and I moved out to our own house, leaving the dolls behind at my parents'. My parents, who before never believed in ghosts or hauntings or my stories of Victoria, were now experiencing situations that they couldn't understand, situations that scared them. They would hear footsteps walking around upstairs, feel a presence sitting next to them. Doors would open and close, even if they had been locked. It got to the point that my mum asked me to take the dolls. Once I did, all of the things they experienced stopped. Since having Victoria back in my presence, my son and I have both had experiences with her. Once while we were napping, my son woke up and pointed to the corner and asked, "Mummy, who is she?" He continued to point at someone I couldn't see. The next incident was where my son started asking to go play in the basement. I asked him why would he want to go and do that? We never play down there. And he replied, "The lady in the basement is nice to me." And often, once again, I hear whispers over the baby monitor. I awoke one night terrified that someone was inside my house because I heard my son talking back to a voice. I ran into his room, but there was no one there, that I could see at least. My decision to remove Victoria from the rest of the dolls does not fully come from fear. Part is from our history. It is evident she does not enjoy being alone or ignored, and the other part is with my son being able to see her form and communicate with her. It appears to me her presence is growing. I will say the only time I fully experienced fear was the nightmare I had one night. It didn't feel like a nightmare though, not like one I have ever experienced. In this nightmare I was walking into my room, my son asleep in my bed. Once I entered my room, I noticed Victoria sitting next to my bed. She had been in the basement. She looked at me and her eyes became dark circles. She opened her mouth and hissed at me. I quickly grabbed her and tried to smash her porcelain face against the wall. But she turned her head all the way around and hissed at me again. I quickly woke up, my heart pounding, and I swear I saw a figure exit my room. The next day my son came home from school with a drawing of a little girl. Her eyes scribbled over with completely dark holes. This artwork I will send along with Victoria as well. I hope she behaves. She does not like to be challenged, to not be in charge, and she does not like to be left alone. Victoria the doll now resides at the Museum of Shadows in Nebraska with other haunted or spiritual items.